The film begins at a building site where a fruitful project worker named Clint enters his office and settles on a phone decision to his lovely spouse Joanna. He lets his better half know that he feels miserable as she is leaving for the end of the week. Yet he will get off work ahead of schedule to see her off. Yet we notice the spouse appears to be irritated by this. Clint is next shown watching out for a guest, while Joanna, back home, removes a package from the letter drop, while a canine constantly barks behind the scenes. The scene movements to show Clint driving down a street when he is come by a sheriff. Sam, the neighborhood sheriff, approaches Clint and inquires as to whether he would be keen on going fishing with him. Clint gives a transparent consent, answering that since Joanna is away for the end of the week, he has a free spot accessible. The sheriff then lets him go, and Clint promptly heads home. When he gets back, he opens the entryway for his canine, Duke, who has been crying since no one lets him out of his container. Joanna doesn't give off an impression of being exceptionally satisfied to see Clint there, and she affirms that she has accepted his message. She likewise needs to leave early in light of the fact that she has a meeting with a specialist. Strangely, Clint illuminates Joanna that a purchaser came by the studio to make one more proposal of $1.5 million to purchase Clint's business. However, Clint chose not to sell it. Joanna remarks that it is truckload of cash. Yet Clint answers how might he respond, assuming he sells the business, to which Joanna answers furiously that they could return to New York. The conversation raises to a contention, and Clint clarifies that he voyaged 2,000 miles from New York to here to fabricate a superior life for them. A not really blissful Joanna then goes out in her light blue vehicle, which obviously was given by her better half, leaving Clint despondently. Subsequently, Clint goes out with the sheriff, and keeping in mind that they fish, Clint dumps a portion of his hardships. The sheriff asks how things are returning home, to which Clint answers that Joanna has been a city young lady attempting to change. In the meantime, it just so happens Joanna has been having an illicit relationship with her PCP Cortland. The specialist tells her how she will possess a facility with him in Beverly Slopes, among different delights. He likewise has removed a poison from the ovaries of a fish and says that the beneficiary will have a heart failure. They plan to kill Clint and sell his organization, and Cortland persuades Joanna to place it in Clint's food to kill him and ensure that he takes every last bit of it. At the point when Joanna returns to her home, she begins discharging her handbag searching for the toxin. When the jug spills and starts spilling, she conceals the toxin in the clothing crate, and we can see that it is spilling inside. After Clint returns home later, he sees Joanna setting up a steak for him and tells Joanna he'll be out in his home studio for some time. Pushed by the commotion from studio, Joanna starts recalling about the toxic substance she had stowed away before. She goes to the waste and recovers the jug of toxic substance, which she at last chooses to add to the wine. Be that as it may, Clint unexpectedly appears and carries the 2 glasses of wine to the supper table. Joanna sits and watches Clint as he eats, stressed over what could occur on the off chance that she drinks from some unacceptable glass. Clint gets the wine and afterward requests that she do a toast with him. Tragically for Clint, he drinks the harmed one, and thus his body begins to respond to it, and he has a heart failure. The spouse tumbles to the floor in agony and shouts for Joanna for help. Yet she will not help him and on second thought urges him to take his life. Joanna then calls her outrage specialist Cortland to tell him the occupation is done. Later on, Sam the sheriff and Cortland show up at the house. Sam is so vexed and doesn't expect that his companion will have a cardiovascular failure thriving. Here we see that the toxin restraint closes being on the ground and Sam almost steps on it. The sheriff then, at that point, inquires as to whether they ought to lead a post-mortem examination. However, Cortland expresses that there's not a really obvious explanation for it. The scene changes to a refrigeration room, with bodies put away there, one of which moves a bit. The following morning, Clint's body is removed from the sack by the coroners, and they begin to set up his body for the memorial service. Simultaneously, Cortland calls the burial service home and lets them know that Joanna believes Clint should have a speedy burial service without preserving. While this is going on, the specialists from the memorial service home are going to cut Clint's body. However, are come by the proprietor, as is commonly said that the family went modest on them. They pick an exceptionally modest coffin to place Clint in and get ready for the burial service. During the memorial service, the canine keeps on acting peculiarly as Joanna approaches the coffin to put her blossom. She then continues to show her regret by crying. Soon thereafter, Joanna is displayed in her tub with Cortland. The 2 offer 2 or 3 beverages and chuckle about the homicide they just pulled off. The night is set apart by tempest and thunder. Duke the canine starts to bark ridiculously, searching for his proprietor. This disturbs Joanna, who says that she has had enough of the canine and takes out a weapon to shoot it. She holds a firearm and tears open the enclosure entryway with a discharge, and as Duke runs out, she attempts to shoot him, however misses. Duke goes to the burial ground, advances toward Clint's grave, and plunks down close to it. However, amazingly, Clint is as yet alive under the casket, and clearly, the impacts of the toxic substance have recently worn off. He feels water trickling all over and attempts to escape the coffin. Overreacted, Clint breaks the coffin. What begins to break because of its low quality. To our extraordinary help, Clint can conquer the obstructions that substitute his direction and creeps out of his grave. He is invited by seeing his canine and afterward begins to advance home. The man can arrive at his front entryway and is as yet battling to walk. He gradually advances toward the side of the house and amazingly, he observes his better half kissing Cortland. Now that he comprehends everything, he holds on until Cortland goes out prior to breaking the windows to his storm cellar and entering it. Clint then attempts to advance higher up, yet he appears to be frail and tumbles down the steps, so he chooses to go through the late evening hanging out in the storm cellar. The next day, Joanna meets Clint's attorney, who furnishes her with data in regards to significant reports that Clint has, as well as insights about Clint's ledger. She lets the attorney know that she will sell the organization for $1.5 million with the installment due in 48 hours. Inside the cellar, Clint at last awakens and heads higher up. He initially goes to the kitchen sink and hydrates. Then he moves to the refrigerator and takes something to eat, since he is greedily ravenous. As he is eating, he sees his significant other returning the vehicle, and he rushes back to the storm cellar, presently with a weapon in his grasp. Be that as it may, he drops the shells and needs to go down the stairway to snatch them. He figures out how to stack the firearm, and afterward heads on above to shoot his better half. Nonetheless, the chime abruptly rings, and it just so happens, the sheriff has come around to investigate Joanna. The sheriff starts to think back how Clint fabricated the house with his exposed hands, and gets some information about the deal sign before the house, to which she answers that the spot appeared to be little, now that Clint had died. The sheriff and Joanna likewise discuss her selling the business. As Sam continues to take off, Cortland has recently shown up to meet his alleged patient prior to advancing in. After seeing that Cortland is in sight as well, Clint understands that he has only one shot stacked, so he makes a beeline for the cellar. In the interim, Jonah starts to go nuts over the sheriff's inquiries, demanding that they ought to leave that very night. Yet Cortland says that they ought to stand by another evening, since the genuine cash from selling the business would come the following day. The two likewise discuss how Joanna had been pregnant and that she had cut short her child, so she wouldn't need to remain with Clint. This incenses Clint further, however he takes out the shells from his rifle, saying that killing them with a weapon would be excessively simple. Soon thereafter, when Joanna has nodded off, Clint gets scissors from the room. Subsequent to tidying himself up, he continues to clean his hands, and he puts gauzes over his injuries. Certain individuals show up the following day with a portfolio brimming with cash, meaning that the offer of the business is finished. Joanna is by all accounts reclaimed by how much abundance in her grasp, and in the wake of letting the finance managers go, she is past energized that she can enjoy the cash with Cortland. In the interim, the sheriff hustles over to Clint's grave, where he finds that it has been uncovered and that the body is missing, accepting that somebody had gotten it done. The sheriff arranges that the coffin be shipped off his home and that everything ought to be stayed silent until he completes his examination. Back at Clint's home, as Joanna grins splendidly over the $1 million, she is dismayed when she tracks down the restroom with mud all around the floor. She then, at that point, calls Cortland, who doesn't reply. So she leaves a phone message cautioning that somebody may be inside the house. Joanna then makes sure to get the firearm and continues to the cellar. She experiences Duke on her way there, and it begins woofing at her, while she gradually moves back and goes to get the firearm. In any case, similarly as she is going to take shots at the canine, Clint secures her in the cellar and circumvents the cellar, blocking every one of the windows. On the opposite side of the story, Cord is conversing with his fish while he moves to take additional toxin from them. He then actually looks at his messages, just to hear that his landowner is coming to throw him out in light of the fact that the past half year's lease was not paid. At the point when Cortland shows up at Clint's home, he takes out the needle with the toxin. As he keeps on shouting to Joanna, he initially goes to her room and sees the portfolio of money. In the meantime, Joanna at last awakens and hears Cortland calling out to her over and over. Feeling that he was the person who frightened her before, Joanna conceals under the steps. She then hits him with a metal pole, tossing the toxin infusion out of his hand. Joanna gets the case and begins to head higher up, However, Clint sees up and closes out. In a little while, Clint begins carrying wood into the house. While Court has quite recently recaptured his cognizance, Joanna apologizes for hitting him and lets him know that somebody in the house has secured them there. Court endeavors to escape by attempting to take shots at the locked entryway, yet figures out that the man has crippled the slugs, and it is only black powder and air. He then, at that point, attempts to tear open a wooden window. However, Duke starts to bark through it, so he at last needs to ease off. Higher up, it is uncovered that Clint endeavors to redesign the house. Clint proceeds to saw into the walls and obliterates an image of him and his better half. At the point when Joanna stirs the following day, Court tells her that they've been stuck there for 8 hours. Court likewise wrongly expects that the man higher up is Sam the sheriff, who needs a slice of the pie. For anything the sheriff has done to them, Courtland is anxious to kill him now. All at once, Joanna winds up seeing the toxic substance infusion under the cabinet. Understanding that Court had carried it to harm her, Joanna conceals the needle and requests that Courtland consume the entirety of the cash, assuming he really adores her. Courtland rejects, so Joanna faces him about the infusion, and he concedes that they won't ever have their very own facility. As Courtland is going to infuse Joanna with the toxin, the way to the cellar opens. The two choose to not squander the infusion on one another, so they leave, just to figure out the house has been renovated with wood all over. They attempt to track down a way through, however continue to stall out. While attempting to discover a way, they are driven through a labyrinth. On the opposite part of town, Sam the sheriff can't quit pondering his companion's case. He attempts to take a gander at the coffin once more and understands that somebody broke out of it while attempting to test his hypothesis. Back at Clint's home, Joanna and Court begin contending once again the wrongdoing they perpetrated, right when a wall arises between them, isolating the two. Toward the finish of a section prompting an unblocked window, Courtland sees a shadowy figure. Believing it's Sam, Courtland attempts to pay off him with all the cash. However, at that point, Clint uncovers himself, making Court stumble on the satchel of cash and fall on the needle, infusing himself with the toxin. In practically no time, a while later, Joanna is caught among Clint in the little portal. She creeps through the entrance along a low entry to where it out of nowhere impasses, permitting Clint to close her inside. Clint at last uncovers himself to her and notices their cut short youngster, inquiring as to whether it was a kid or a young lady. He then, at that point, dumps the dead Courtland and cash inside what is currently a huge wooden final resting place and nails it shut. Up next, he continues to pour fuel out of control and uses a flare to set his home ablaze. He puts the huge box on his truck and doesn't neglect to bring along his steadfast canine. Before long, Sam shows up at the scene, and after the fire is quenched, no bodies are found. At the point when Sam visits the burial ground once more, he sees a man remaining at Clint's filled-in grave and has a little talk. Understanding that it is his companion Clint, Sam lets Clint know that he doesn't have any acquaintance with him and doesn't have any desire to see him here at any point in the future. Clint grasps this and gets in his truck to depart. Before the film closes, it is uncovered that the still alive Joanna, the dead Courtland and the cash all currently possess Clint's grave, with Joanna horrendously shouting for help.